my beloved, like Earth for me is family, it's my family, and it's always felt like that. And I found great solace being in nature, being by the sea, just being alone, but not feeling alone when I was actually, in nature. And I learned a lot about my creativity, about my soul through that relationship. And it's really alive. It's very alive all the time. So, in some ways, I never feel alone. Not like the kind of loneliness you could sometimes feel with humans if they're not kind of your humans, like from your ethos, so to speak. So, musically, a lot of my concerts are called on behalf of the earth, on behalf of the planet, or as planet. My singing, I'm giving you kind of an overview because it relates to the initiative, the Rights of Nature initiative. I have always felt this urgency and this kind of desperate shock that other people don't understand that the planet's alive, or that it's intelligent and creative, and that if it weren't for planet, we wouldn't be any of those things either. And it's been hard to participate in because it's systemic, and watch kind of a missing North Star around how to love the planet in an active way, not just through ritual, but through protection, celebrating through protection. So there's so many different ways I could go, but I know one of the most important things is to show you the initiative and tell you the story behind it. Which comes first? I'm just going to close my eyes for a minute. I'm landing from a commute, so I really appreciated Mark's rich, calm voice so that I could have a minute to really, really land. And I'm still landing. I know you've been on a walk. Some of you, at least, have been on a walk, a virtual walk together. And I'd like to take you on another one. It's short, but it's sort of an introduction to where I came from. I grew up in England, and I grew up with a forest, like a ridiculously large body of forest just up the top of my hill. And before we even got a dog, I was always in the forest. And I discovered that the forest has multiple moods. It's not all like kissy kissy, lovey lovey. The forest can have moods of temper and strong energy, and it's very humbling. I found it very humbling. So Epping Forest is the name of the forest that was really the one at the top of my hill. And many years later, after I'd moved to California in my sort of early to mid-20s, so I was there as a very young child, um, I was sitting at my piano, which was by this long wall of windows. And on the other side of that was green, kind of like this, trees and grass. And the light was hitting the grass and the leaves with such beauty. It was so radiant and complex that I was suddenly taken back to Epping Forest. And I created this song, which I'm going to play for you because I'd like to introduce you to Epping Forest. So I'm just going to share the audio. That should be enough. Oh, what's it doing? 1 second. Computer audio. There we go. So please enjoy walking with me in Epping Forest for a few moments in Essex, in England. in the UK, next to the North Sea.
A walk through Epping Forest. So there I go, walking through the forest of my youth. And as my feet go one, planted in front of the other, walking on the pathway, covered in leaves, different colours, different stages of decay, of brittleness, subtlety, suppleness, fern and bracken interwoven, different vegetation talking to each other, nestling amongst each other, intertwining amongst each other. And as I look up to the forest of the trees above, the tall, tall trunks reaching to the sky, to the sun, to the rain, everything has its place. The sunlight is dappled across the leaves, across the ground, across my face, my hair. And as I walk, I feel the forest wrapping itself around me and at the same time opening itself up for me. And we are one. As I walk, it walks with me. As I move, it moves. One expressing the other, connected. And then comes a breeze. The leaves rustle. They bend. Constantly shimmering in the sunlight. The creatures, the little animals, the little insects, everything so populated, so busy, so silent, so loud. Movement, movement, movement. So graceful, this movement is so graceful. This earth is so beautiful. It's so alive. Constantly dying, regenerating, constant motion, cycles of being. And I'm in that. I'm a part of that. Not from it. So beautiful.
Thank you, Dean. Over time, I've noticed that humans, lots of them, not all of them, not the people here, I doubt very much, don't quite know what we're doing here or what the planet's doing here. And there is a feeling, as I observe this and witness it, of that there's a gap between our incredible design and our incredible potential and the way we see ourselves. And for a number of years, I was teaching at San Francisco State University, and I was teaching management students creativity and innovation, but really it was sort of an undercover operation. And what I was actually teaching them was different ways of knowing and being. I wanted them as managers to have an influence on other people in terms of how to include other ways of knowing and being that are different from the westernized sort of mechanistic style. And within that, I used to get them to research ancestral consciousness and to research nature's consciousness or nature's intelligence. And it was interesting to see how they responded to that. They usually looked a little perplexed to start with, but they really jumped in each time, in spite of not really being prepared for that as an assignment. They saw a relationship between the two. That was the first thing I noticed. And the other was when they thought about nature's intelligence, sometimes they understood and took it that there was an intelligence inside of nature, that nature is itself intelligent, but other times they looked at whether humans were being intelligent in relation to nature. So there were these two different approaches to it. But I continued to realize that nothing was really happening to protect the planet. And some of my friends are and were, one has since died, Polly Higgins, friends of mine who are environmental lawyers, as well as earth activists, as well as social rights, civil rights activists, and the recognition that really all three have to be in play. So human rights need to be met, the planet's needs, which some people will and will not call rights, need to be met. And then there's our spirituality, the thing that makes us human, the thing that brings us into relationship. And so I found myself thinking about, well, why isn't it protected? Why isn't it protected? So I worked with a group of people, and I'm going to share my screen while I tell you this part. Hang on. Where is it? Here. And it was really my passion project was to decide that it was time to, there was talk of something called a constitutional convention, which is really bad news, really, if it happens, because it means that people like the Koch brothers and people who are fossil fuel oriented, they want to change the constitution to, I think, firm up the personhood of corporations. So they want to corporatize the constitution. And so I was sort of educated about that. And I thought, well, if they're going to have a meeting like that, then we need the other voice in there. We need representation for all the other. And that was really the impetus for creating an initiative and filing it. So this was back in 2017 where it started to come into form. And I'm actually going to kind of focus more on some of the elements, because some of them aren't relevant to the conversation around the rights of nature. But there's civil rights. There are civil community rights. And all of these have weaved into it. And I'll put the link in the chat. I actually have a bit.ly link somewhere so that you can have a look at this whenever you want to. But the civil community rights, business practices, wages, and then here we go, protecting the dignity of life. So I'm not going to just read it to you, because you can do that whenever you are so inclined. What I'd like to do is kind of present it and then maybe just have everyone on mute so that we can have a conversation. Because actually what I'm really interested in doing is seeing if there are people and communities that think maybe they'd like to use it, because it is an open, living, breathing document. I filed it at the state capitol here in California, and about a little shortly before we would have been getting signatures, we realized that we were actually having quite in-depth conversation with Native American communities who wanted to be involved, and that was massive. I'd been trying for about a year and I learned a lot about colonization and how not to do things. And eventually there was a shift, and it felt really, really important that if we could get them on board, they could steward it, because it's really, I feel like so much needs to be handed back, talking about the dignity of life. But in terms of the actual context, this is it. So there's a lot of repeating, because it seems that legally you have to repeat things from different directions a lot in order to get to cover your bases. So it's all about respecting and protecting the rights of nature as a sovereign living being with inalienable legal rights to protection that derive from its or her or his, however you do that, their inherent dignity as a source of life, the source of life, to continue to exist, thrive, and evolve naturally, uncompromised by pollution, degradation, damage, or destruction. Nature includes, but is not limited to, all ecology: land, water, air, plant, animal, wildlife, wilderness, all living beings, including human beings, and naturally occurring ecosystems as they exist as independent species and as interdependent groups and habitats that support the essential well-being and workings of all life. To declare that nature is a freely living being with inalienable rights, and that no individual, business entity, government, owner, or organization shall inflict violence or servitude on her. Nature is not mere property, but instead does have rights of her own. Make it an irrevocable law that no individual, business entity, government, or organization shall aggressively, recklessly, disrespectfully, or unsustainably pollute, degrade, or overuse nature. And then I define pollution, I define degrading, I define overuse. All those things you have to kind of think about. You have to think all this stuff through. Protecting resources, so that it says to forbid practices like planned obsolescence, which I can't believe that's allowed, or any practice that disregards frugal, wise, or sustainable use of nature's resources, and that all living species may have clean and healthy habitats, longevity, access to their own natural resources, to reasonably and justly meet their own needs. Planned waste is in direct violation of protecting the future of life for all beings and must be rendered immediately unlawful and illegal, and in violation of protecting nature's, including humans' right to exist. Declare that where pollution, degradation, or overuse has occurred, nature has the right to restoration. This integral restoration is independent of the obligation on natural and juridical persons or the state to indemnify the people and the collectives that depend on the natural systems. A lot to do with local communities being re-empowered to have final says included, and final says on any kind of development on their land at all. Declare that there is a legal duty. This is the thing about making these things legal. There is a legal duty and obligation for each state and each entity to care for nature's inherent right to a healthy, peaceful, regenerative existence. We, the people in our communities, are empowered and protected by sovereign law, local law, from preemption from private authorities, from any non-disclosures or secret acts by local, state, and federal representatives to ensure and protect nature's rights to clean and healthy water, soil, and air as a source of life, and to ensure that natural systems can continue to propagate themselves sustainably and for the future of all life. So there's that piece where I go into it and into it and into it. And then the human community rights of nature recognize that humans are an inseparable part of nature, and all that affects nature affects humans and all living beings. Recognize humans' paramount rights to an unpolluted, healthy planet. Recognize that nature's health is inextricably tied to human health and must therefore be maintained as a priority. above business, government, or private interests that can be deemed to threaten said health and said entitlement to health. I talk about, or it, I should say, talks about peaceful coexistence. Adopt a cradle to cradle design principle, wherein industry, local communities, and local, state, and federal governance must protect and enrich ecosystems and nature's biological metabolism, whilst also maintaining safe, productive, technical metabolism. So you can't ignore the fact that things need to be made. So somehow that has to be included and languaged in certain ways. And then this is the last one I want to share from the actual initiative, which is that I know we all know this, that so many companies manufacture abroad where there are less stringent enforcements, even less stringent eco laws, but also less stringent enforcements, even if they do exist. So I've put in here that if a company is doing that, a USA company is doing that abroad, that they are accountable to the highest court, whether it's the US court or some kind of international environmental court, so that they are accountable no matter where they're doing their business, where they're manufacturing, where they're polluting, where they're damaging and violating and degrading and so on. So I'm going to stop sharing that for a sec because it's a lot of words. And I'm looking at the chat. David says, in July 2019, Bangladesh became the first country to grant all of its rivers. It's so fascinating to me. I'm intrigued by how it is that certain elements of nature get recognized. And I'm wondering if anyone has any thoughts about that. Or has everybody gone away?
We better give others the opportunity first, because I could go for hours. And I'm
If someone's got something to say, just say it, because this is meant to.
I'll say something. I'm just very impressed that you got all this on paper. Are you like some kind of environmental lawyer, or what? This is impressive.
I love that question. No, I'm not. I'm not. Thank you for the acknowledgement. I'll tell you something that I wouldn't normally say, but I'm a Libran, and apparently one of the career paths for Librans is to be lawyers. So I'm actually an artist. I'm a teacher, I'm a feeler. I heal people. That's what I do. Like, I teach and I heal, and I sing and I paint and I write. So to do this was a genuine passion, as I mentioned, a sort of a passion project. When I get into this particular subject, I get really tenacious. It matters so much. And I've seen people be killed because they've been trying to protect the planet. And it's so absurd to me that we're not pressing stop on all of that. Atlantis, you look like you have some thoughts happening.
Oh yeah, my head's spinning. Well, the bottom line is that the sort of the bigger money interests, the larger corporations and all, they can write checks to politicians and get their way. In other words, they're looking out for their territory, right? And who's looking out for the environment? I mean, you have the same thing with children. Who's advocating for children? Who's advocating for the people?
Right.
And the idea of assigning declaring the environment is like a person, or a living being. I guess that's one way to go at it. It's so important, especially now that we see how badly we've screwed up and really need to fix it. Carbon-based creatures choking in our own waste, it's like, well, how do we, because the earth can't speak in a court of law for itself,
Exactly.
It's like, How does
exactly.
that happen? But I mean, what you're doing is trying to give a voice to that, it seems.
I am. I mean, since we apparently have leadership that is not really qualified to understand the gestalt nature of life itself, it seems that the way to turn it into a narrative that's actionable is to turn it into law. And dear Polly Higgins, who was one of the kindest humans I ever met, she was a Scottish lawyer. And one day, as her story goes, she was looking out the window and she thought, Earth needs representation. And so she decided, I'm going to make Earth my pro bono client. And then she devoted her entire life, and I'll put it in here. Anyone can find this. Eradicating Ecocide is the movement that she founded and has collaborators on. So she died 3 years ago. Not much. I mean, I can't believe. I think it was only 3 years ago. There was an anniversary for her online recently, which shocked me how recent it still was. But what she was trying to do was to work. Now, what was this? The Roman. Oh, maybe someone else will remember the name of this. But there's I can look it up as well. But there's some kind of initiative that can happen at the UN level that needs 58 signatures. And if those 58 signatures of members of the UN occurs, the Rome Statute, I think it's called, then they were going to be able to put into law that corporate people within corporations, so I think the CEO, whoever's the highest person, and this was all very thought through. It's very doable, it's not kind of fantasy land, that they become personally liable, which is fantastic. Because then it's not just this blank wall of a corporation that can liquidate itself to avoid paying penalties, but it's actually the people inside it. And I think once people get involved by law, I think we'll see a lot of change. But Polly's point, which I have too, is that one day she hopes that there will be no need for laws such as this, because we will have evolved beyond the point of kind of infantilizing reality in a way, or because we're not really understanding the complexity. But the relationships between things are actually really simple. It's not rocket science. But it's treated like it, or it's treated like fantasy. So, I made the document available. I had, actually, I will show you this. I made friendships with people. So eradicating ecocide. I like meeting people. So for me, this part was really easy. And because I believed in it, it's really easy too. Because I know that when I believe something, people believe me. Just like with anyone here, when you know something in your bones has rightness inside it, rightness on its side, it's very easy to talk about it convincingly without persuading. So eradicating ecocide, this was Polly's. So these were the partners and allies that I created. Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, Resource Renewal Institute. I think this one's actually in Northern California. Tree Sisters, which is really large. Claire's a friend of mine. She's another English Claire. Nature's Rights. This is a Scottish eco lawyer. She's actually Indian, but she lives in Scotland. Earth Law Centre. I think I'm an ambassador at the UN. Like, there's a UN environmental kind of group, and you can be any kind of person. You can be an artist, a teacher. You don't have to be an environmentalist, but obviously you have to have an interest in it. Otherwise, why would you be there? So I need to follow up on that, actually, because I think this is coming alive again. So this is the rights of Mother Earth, Earth Guardians. Now, Earth Guardians, you will have heard of, even if you're not sure, you have. Earth Guardians are related to, what's it called? There are two entities. Earth Guardian is one, and the other entity, which I can't think of in this second, these are the young Native American communities who have been doing, like they did the Levi ad, right, with the jeans where they're talking about recycle, like don't, buy good quality because then it's not going to get obsolete. So this is Earth Guardians is right here. So they're really important. Their work, these are young people, with their mums helping them track everything and also to stay healthy because this kind of work is relentless. CellDev, which is an American-based, they provide legal services to environmental groups. They also provide education around the country. So I was having a lot of conversations with a guy called Ben, who's one of their lawyers. Move to Amend they're very well known for their civil rights, and then Kiss the Ground, which is just a fantastic organization that's re-educating people about soil use. But yeah, I did a lot of research. I looked at other countries, whether they had given personhood to a mountain or a river. Santa Monica, as a city, has given personhood to, I think, some of their rivers. I can't remember, something in there, some kind of rights of nature. Bolivia, I think Ecuador, they're not all following them, but at least they're in there, right? So it's a start. I'm just looking at the chat again. Please feel free to jump in. Stephanie, what kind of thoughts are you having?
I think it's wonderful what you've done, and just really appreciate just really appreciate that, and just and neat to see all the links and things. I'm not sure if you put that in there. That would be great.
I've put the bit.ly rights of nature in there,
right,
which is a short link.
What you just shared with all the links that you just shared.
Ah, right. So that's all on that rights of nature initiative link. The bit.ly, it's really hard to say that. Bit.ly link will take you to the full initiative, and people are welcome to just use any part of it. It's not like it's like use it this way or you're not allowed. I mean, I invited people. For me, the point was it needs to be collective. And so I approached all those people that are now called allies, and I said, listen, you work every day, just to stay in the same place, to not lose the ground that you've gained with all the work you've done. Wouldn't it be nice if you didn't have to do that all the time? If you could just deal with improvements on how we do things, introducing regenerative practices, for instance. So I said, why don't you put in what you think needs to be there to make this more watertight, to make this relevant, to make this something you believe in? And so those organizations, they each took a look, and some of them put some stuff in. But I love it. Yeah, if it was enacted everywhere. Mark?
Yeah, we've been beaming a lot. And of course, we know that BEAM is the backcasting Evolutionary Alliance mediums. And you've shared with us the journey of how you got to now, so your past.
Yeah.
And you have this document. You've had exchange with many different people. So if we were to futurecast and say, this is really what we would like to see in the world, these rights adopted throughout the world, what a beautiful thing that would be. Wow.
So exciting.
Yeah. What do you think are the steps? We're going to backcast from here to that future.
Mm-hmm.
What are the steps? What do you see that it will take to get there?
May I go first?
You start us off, and then everybody
Okay.
can add into that.
So I've actually never done that, like consciously, deliberately. I sort of think, but not necessarily this deliberately. So it's a great question. Well, I would think the first thing is everyone needs to be aware that such a thing exists, such a document is available to use however they want to. So then there would be that part, right? Making it visible, making it part of the conversation that people are having locally and statewide somehow. So it's a lot of work. I mean, this is like community grassroots level kind of stuff. Media campaigns to raise awareness. I think possibly collaborating or at least associating more publicly with the eradicating ecocide people, because that's a very functional process that they are establishing. So that comes to mind as a general thing. As a person, what comes to mind for me is dynamic emergence, which I'll explain in a while, because I don't want to go sideways yet. I want everyone to have a chance to feed into this backcasting process. But yeah, there are artist ways that I think I could do some really interesting things, even with the document, turning it into something creative, multi-layered, with sound and stuff, and just talking about it. If you believe in something, sometimes I think you just have to be like relentlessly excited about it, So that's some immediate thoughts, but I'd love to hear what comes up for others.
I'll address that. I love future casting. I guess I'm a bit of a futurist myself. Well, what stands out to me, I mean, in terms of awareness, I think most people have kind of heard the news, like we're maybe in trouble. And who is it? Gus Speth is an environmental consultant with the US government and whatnot. And he came out and said, look, I used to think our real problems were biodiversity loss and climate change and this sort of thing. And he said, I figured 30 years of good science will fix all that. He said, I was wrong. He says, our real challenges are apathy, greed, right? Selfishness. And he said, what we need is a spiritual and cultural revolution. And us scientists don't know how to do that, right? And you said it, Claire, that, evolution of consciousness, how at some point we're going to evolve, and right. And that's actually my work is focused on that, using immersive media to open hearts and minds. So, if what you're talking about, like being in nature and sensing and feeling, and that's empathy. And that's opening your heart and opening, your mind and being empathetic, and then, right. And a lot of people don't know how to do that. And I think when they hear, oh, there's, right, there could be bad things, climate change, that just after a while, they just kind of, they can't take it anymore. And they just tune it all out, And so I think, the evolution of consciousness, empathy is really, we're going to be in big trouble if we don't get wiser, because each one of us has power at our fingertips now. I mean, any fool can, with a smartphone, can like become an influencer and right. And it's like, so it's just amplifying our consciousness. And you can see what's happening. Our consciousness maybe needs an uplift.
You're giving me a thought, of course, right? Collective connections here, interweaving. I think one of the things I had to learn to do, and I have other friends who had similar journeys, is to talk freely about my relationship to the aliveness of planet, to being planet. There was a lot of fear around doing that. And so the language remained the same, the objectifying type of language that tends to get used in consumer societies. I think because I have a strong teaching background, I used to teach my teddies, literally. I was about 6 or 7 years old. I used to line all my teddies up on my bed, all the big ones at the back, little ones at the front so everyone could see, you know. And then I had my little A-frame, this is so true. I had my little A-frame chalkboard with the big piece of chalk, and I used to teach them things. I have no idea what I was teaching them, probably whatever I might have been learning at school, I don't know. But it meant something to me, and I remember remembering that in a Bohemian circle, because I've done a Bohemian dialogue over the years. And a Bohemian dialogue, in case someone here doesn't know what that is, you sit in a circle and you kind of wait for something that must express itself. Do that. And then you might go back into, you know, the no speaking, but it's very much an emergent field. And it's based on the idea of a collective wisdom awaiting to arise through willing partners. And it's not a conversation, so the next person that speaks would not say something that follows on from that or that debates it. It's a very atypical kind of thing. I don't know why, I've forgotten why I started telling you that. Sorry. Could anyone help? What was I saying that then I suddenly went into David Bohm?
Well, it sounded like you were addressing pedagogy or teaching, right?
Oh yes, thank you so much. Yeah, so in that, the teacher, because I was doing a master's degree in consciousness studies at the time, and the teacher, who became a good friend of mine, he asked us, what did you ever do when no one was, you know, when you weren't really aware of people watching you? What did you used to do just because, you know, when you were young? And I suddenly flashed on that memory, and he saw me get this massive grin on my face. I'm like, oh my God. Because he said, whatever you used to do when no one was watching is probably what you like doing, you know. So for me, that's a circular way of saying, for me, it's about education. So I had the question. I know we're intelligent. We are designed to be so freaking intelligent and so incredibly creative. We are extraordinary. We're not more extraordinary. I don't say that, but we are extraordinary within our own possibilities here in terms of how we're designed. And so I wanted to answer the question, how is it then, if we're intelligent and if we have capacity and if we're creative, but especially if we're intelligent, why would we be choosing to do something that will end our lives? Because it's not intelligent, right? So sometimes I can be very straightforward, like in that, like, da, 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 da. So it's like, so if you're intelligent and if you like being alive, then the logical thing is that you wouldn't do anything that would damage the possibility of you being alive, right? To me, that would come under common sense. And I'm thinking to myself, so what's the deal? What is the deal here? Why is it possible for an intelligent species to render itself extinct, potentially, apart from all the other damage that we're doing? Just thinking purely about humans for a moment. So then I started thinking about, well, how do we know, you know, how do we know anything? And why is it only certain ways of knowing are highlighted and included and other ways of knowing are left out or demonized, like being sensitive? You know, men aren't meant, you know, this is the older stuff, the old school stuff. Men aren't meant to have feelings. If you cry, you're weak. If you say that the earth is talking to you, you're crazy, you know, and all that. And then indigenous people are just behind the times. I mean, just the stuff we've come out with, you know, as a collective, in terms of mainstream thinking. So that was the context. And then I was teaching this class at San Francisco State where they were studying Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences as part of their learning. And I literally rewrote the syllabus. I taught on and off for 8 years there, and I rewrote the syllabus every semester because I was looking for something. I think I was looking for what stayed because it was true enough to keep staying. And it was this piece to do with the intelligences, and people kept saying, like people who knew me outside of the degree program kept saying, oh, I really want to do your course. I'm like, well, you can't really, you know, because you have to be doing a degree. So I knew that there was an interest in it. And then I stopped teaching there and I thought, how do I simplify this? Because Howard Gardner has all these intelligences. It's like, how do we make this so you can actually have a basic conversation in a pub with somebody, right? It's got to get that real. And I thought, okay, so there is I see something from Harlan. I'll read that in a second. I'll just finish this thought. So there's rational knowing, there's emotional knowing, and there's sensory knowing. And there's also rational being, emotional being, sensory being. These have unique ways of being experienced, and they also have unique ways of inspiring us to thought and to relationship, different ways of experiencing relationship. So I don't know if I'm going to do it right now. It depends how we go on time, but I do have a session next week where I'm going to talk about dynamic emergence, which is what I'm talking about right now. Because the fact of it is that what I learned when I mapped it out, I did lots of mind maps and videos that go with it, is this. And this was like, oh, I get it. So here's the rule. It's called the inversion theory. And the inversion theory states that if you only use one of those three ways of knowing, it will become the inverse of itself. So let me explain that a tiny bit. If you've got rational knowing, and if you've got emotional knowing, and if you've got sensory knowing, sensory is the ability to feel subtle energy, which would include, I think, the ability to feel a connection to Earth, But you see, if the rational is so highlighted, which it has been, that it's kind of doing this, I'm not going to listen, I'm not going to see anything about the emotions or anything about the body, because it's not convenient. If my bottom line is purely rational and it's all about a particular bottom line dollar amount, for instance, or that if I don't do this, I'll get fired, and then how do I feed my family? Then we start to make, or if I don't feel the damage, if I start drilling into Earth and I don't feel the Earth crying or hurting, or if there are fires happening and I don't see the relationship, like all the animals losing their home and the soil being scarred, so 500 years of evolution gone in one fire, then I'm going to be freed up in a way to do whatever it takes to make money, if that's the goal. And so that becomes so blinkered, the thinking can become so blinkered if it's not informed by a heart relationship or a body sensitivity, that irrational choices will be made. There's no relationship to the consequences, no visceral relationship. And there was a period of time for me where I was disconnected. I think probably because my mother had died when I was very young, but old enough to understand that I'd lost something really, really valuable. So I was 14. And I think for a while I just went into party town mode to cope. And during that time, I didn't feel the Earth. I didn't really want to feel anything. So that grief, I didn't know how to do grief. I didn't have to be with grief, my grief. And so I shut down. And I think because of that, it gave me the opportunity to know what it's like to mock things, to disbelieve things, to disparage things, to dismiss things. Because when you're cut off from your feelings, in a way, you have to do things like that to sustain that distance.
Thank you, Claire. Harlan does have a question for you, and he's here with us. You don't even have to read it.
Oh, good. Harlan, hello.
Yes, hi. Yes, Claire. I was fortunate to tune in, at the beginning of your talk. So I heard very clearly, your whole kind of rational agenda of how the planet should, or we would think as rational people would want to treat the planet. And yet clearly, as I put in my question, and I'm going to read this full Buckminster Fuller quote, as he calls it, the temporal power structures, dictums of the ages. And I'll read the quote where Bucky used that phrase. But, basically my question was addressing, because, as I listen to you say all these things, of course, they're obvious on one hand, but on the other hand, there's a very strong agenda that suppresses that doesn't want to see that happening. And that agenda's been around for a long time. And some people will just say, oh, that's human nature. But I think we're coming to a point where a lot of people are starting to recognize this agenda and seeing it there. And then, our path, of course, is to be like, okay, there really is this agenda. And now we're going to be like, oh, no, I no longer consent to it, and I just want to, because, a lot of this problems we have is because of like economics. It's more economical or something. It
Yeah.
makes more money sense to, the planned obsolescence. That's an economics. Keep our factory making more junk so we can make more money, and all of the issues can be somewhat traced back to their economic basis. And so I actually carried this quote. I cut it out and put it in my wallet for years, and it wore out. And I kept it now that it's worn out on a little like shrine or something. But I found the whole quote so I could read it clearly. And it regards money. And of course, it's really interesting because the money is a major crux. But let me just read it because we all love Bucky and we're all here because of
Yes.
Mr. Fuller Design Science Studio. And okay, here it is, straight from Bucky. I see the hydrogen atom doesn't have to earn a living before behaving like a hydrogen atom. In fact, as best as I can see, only human beings operate it on the basis of having to earn a living. The concept is one introduced into social conventions only by the temporal power structures dictum of the ages. If I am doing what God's evolutionary strategy needs to have accomplished, I need spend no further time worrying about such matters. And I love Bucky's use of language. So let me just dissect that a little bit to like almost answer the question for you, even though I want to hear you and have a dialogue with you. But he used that term, the temporal power structures, dictums of the ages. So that is this kind of like multinationalist global agenda, like he called in his last book, The Grunch of Giants. So he talked about that a lot. That's the agenda. And the answer, which he puts in this quote, is just to say, we just need to do what God's evolutionary strategy needs to have accomplished. That was his use. And of course, using the word God and evolution, so that's maybe, I'll leave it at that and let you respond to these thoughts, though, especially about addressing this negative power control structure, because you didn't really address that much when you were proposing all of the solutions. Okay, thank you so much for your time. I'm so glad to be here with you today and honored to connect with you.
Oh, Harlan, that's really kind of you. Thank you. Okay, I think this taps into the other part of me. So I have this intellectual side, and so I'll use it if it can be of service, if and when it can be of service. But the truth is, I think that the larger impact, and this is my personal answer, right, not like some official answer, is that I think it's all about consciousness, all about consciousness. So there are some people that won't make it, like they're not going to evolve fast enough. I'm hearing an echo. Is anyone else? Let me.
You are starting to echo a
A
little.
little echo. It sounded good, though. It was like reverb.
Make sure everybody's on mute.
Oh, actually, I just turned my own volume down. That helped. Okay, good. So I constantly sort of swing between just focusing on performing and doing art and singing, doing sound healing work, because I know that that's doing something that is immeasurable, literally immeasurable, but I know it's doing something and it can bypass a lot of the mental objections to change that requires us giving up something. Yes, there is an agenda. There is some kind of, one might call it an entity or just a collective of people that are so determined to maintain what they have. My ethos is so different than that. It's not necessarily different from anyone else's here, but to my mind, I don't really understand the need for profit, for servitude, any of these things, because they don't really align with the dignity of life. But I think the only thing that can be done at this point, and I'm 57 now, So I've had some time to think about this and to try things out. And I think the only thing that works for me is to feel clean with my own soul. And that means speaking the truth about when something's not working right, looking right, sounding right, whether it's affecting me directly or something near me. I do not, when I worked in the political field as an activist, because I worked with Extinction Rebellion for a few years too, right in the strategic center. And there's a lot of angst in fighting against something. And I know this is kind of a Bucky thing too, is like, don't fight something, create something better, and it will attract people. And so even when I was giving political talks for Extinction Rebellion in London, you know, I'd say to people, even if you didn't believe, if you really didn't believe in climate crisis or an emergency of any kind, wouldn't it be nice if your children didn't have asthma? You know, wouldn't it be nice if you felt safe to walk the streets because everyone had enough? And this kind of thing. So the dark side, I see Atlantis put the dark side of capitalism. Yes, there is a dark side. And I think for my own sake, in a way, I choose not to fight it directly, but to kind of maneuver. So I guess it's sort of a consciousness aikido. And I don't know if that's a helpful answer or not, but I think one has to go where the impulse, the whisper, Rumi's whisper, inclines us to go. And oftentimes that's a void, like there isn't something specific necessarily that we know we're going to get from doing it. There aren't guarantees. That's why it takes courage, I think, to live a real life, because it often means letting go of things before you've got anything to replace it with. And that means having trust. And trust means you have to believe in the universe. You have to believe that it works in your favor. Not biased towards you, but in response to you. I think if you or we stay, if we really, really are bold in our hearts, I honestly believe that will create the change. I really do. I don't see anything else that can. The initiative is helpful because it's a structural thing, so it's an aid, but it is still rational. And I think the rational, like Einstein talked about, is really here to be in service of our other ways of knowing and being. So it could be helpful, but I don't think arguing over words and numbers seems to make a difference in changing our direction. But if, you know, I know how different I am around different people. And that's also why I wrote out dynamic emergence, because there is something absolutely real to that. So I think if one stays in the company of people that keep bringing us into new possibilities of insight, that alone is feeding into the collective consciousness. Let me show you something quickly. I've got just a couple of minutes. Hang on. And if you want to come to this, you can. Oh, this is a link to an article I wrote a long time ago, by the way, about a society, a workable society. But that's what I actually want to show you is this. Oh, here you are. This will work. So this website, and I'll put a link in a second. This map. This is a map of a human from the perspective of dynamic emergence. And all of these are embedded, they're nested hierarchies. And it's the experience of being a human. So we have all this is all, and I'll go into this more at the time I'm meant to, but this is all the interior stuff, including the not knowing. Very, very important, because otherwise how do we take in, right? How do we receive and connect with new insights? They might not be new in absolute terms, but new to us. But all of this exists inside of a collective consciousness. So I literally cannot, and why would I, although sometimes maybe I want to, leave the collective consciousness. I just can't do it. I'm in it. I'm emanating it. I'm influenced by it. And that's another thing, fields of influence. We're influenced by everything that's going on. So it's very important that we pay attention to how our energy is feeling, because that's all connected to our thinking, our beliefs, and what we're able to generate, how we feel about ourselves. All of that is very much affected by who we're hanging out with and what kinds of paradigms we're being influenced by. So that collective consciousness, all of this is breathing and moving constantly. It's never still, never still. All of that sits inside of planetary consciousness. So the planet we came after, right? So planet is our home. And our qualities are facilitated by both the planet and, of course, the cosmos itself. So we do belong. And as a human, for a long time, I didn't know if I belonged. But that had a lot more to do with my upbringing and what I needed that I wasn't getting mirrored, stuff like that, you know, things about being an artist or being a healer that wasn't really in my social environment. So that was confusing. But to reassert, so one of my go-tos is that I teach dynamic emergence, and I try and teach it everywhere to all sorts of different people, different backgrounds and everything, using straightforward everyday language, unlike spiral dynamics or integral theory, you know, which are slightly more specialized language. And I'm not faulting them. I'm just saying, for me, it's about accessibility. So for people to actually even see, you know, because like we think we live on the planet, but we live in the planet. And so to see it can possibly be helpful. Anyway, so Mark's doing it. He's studying it at the moment.
Claire, what a robust, full time with you here. I know there's probably a lot more questions, and if folks pay attention to the schedule throughout the next few days, Claire will be presencing herself in a number of different ways. If everybody wants to just come off of the microphone and share their joy and their sense of consciousness that they've expanded here in these moments with Claire, let's take a moment to do that before we transfer on to the next journey. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Claire.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
glad to get to meet you and get
Thank
to
you.
learn of your work. We'll look forward to staying connected.
Thank you. It's really lovely to be with you all. I find you terribly inspiring in the best possible way, all of you. It's a great field. So thank you for lifting me up too. I was so glad. I'm looking at the chat. I'm really grateful, because when I was talking at the beginning, I sometimes think, oh no, I'm being really left-brained. And everyone's probably gone to sleep.
That's not the case at all. As a matter of fact, I think we have a little bit of a map for that backcasting journey to arrive at where your heart wants to take us, Claire. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I'll see you sitting around
Okay.
in different
Where should we see
locations.
today?
Oh, I'm going to save the chat.
You're going to get the whole day's worth.
Thank you.
Who's up next? Who's coming to welcome in what comes next on this journey? Is it Nico and Roxy?
It is, but we're gonna restart the stream. So let's thank you, Claire. That was amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm gonna stop the recording. Start the recording. There we go. And amazing. Just amazing. Dun, 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 dun. Hold up. Wait for it.
Nico, I'm going to have to send you the photo of me tap dancing as a kid